In 2022, one basketball team lost 58 games in a single season. 58. They were the youngest, least experienced roster in the entire league. Nobody, not the analysts, not the bookmakers, not even their own fans, expected anything from them. 3 years later, that same team stood at center court, holding the championship trophy. Here's the question that should stop you in your tracks. How does anyone, a team, a company, a person, go from rock bottom to the top of the mountain in 3 years? The answer isn't talent, it isn't luck, and it definitely isn't money. Researchers who studied over 6,000 professionals across law firms, hospitals, tech companies, and trading floors found something remarkable. The highest performing teams on Earth, the ones people call Superteams, all shared the same 7 invisible habits. And once you see them, you'll start noticing them everywhere. In a basketball locker room, in a hospital ward, in Pixar's animation studio, and maybe in your own team. Let's go through all 7, and by the end, you'll understand exactly what separates a team that plateaus from one that becomes legendary.
Here's the trap most teams fall into. They find something that works, and they stop. They stop asking what if, they stop testing, they stop taking risks, because why mess with success? But the best teams do the opposite. They treat what's working as a starting point, not a finish line. Think about Thomas Edison. Before he ever lit a single bulb, he ran through roughly 10,000 failed attempts. When a reporter once suggested he'd failed 10,000 times, Edison famously reframed it. He hadn't failed. He'd simply eliminated 10,000 ways that don't work. That mindset, that every failed attempt is data, not defeat, is exactly what separates stagnant teams from evolving ones. Basketball's biggest turnaround stories follow the same rule. Rather than clinging to a winning formula, the underdog team we opened with did something almost nobody in their sport dared to do. They traded away their own star players while those players were still great, just to open space for new ideas and new talent. It looked like madness from the outside. It was actually discipline. The lesson is simple. Don't wait for permission to experiment. Make small bets constantly and treat every outcome, win or lose, as fuel for the next attempt.
Now here's something counterintuitive. The strongest leaders are often the ones most comfortable saying, "I don't know." 2,400 years ago, Socrates built an entire philosophy around one idea, that true wisdom begins the moment you admit how little you actually know. He wasn't the smartest man in Athens because he had all the answers. He was the smartest man in Athens because he never stopped asking questions. That same humility shows up in modern research on psychological safety, the single strongest predictor of how well a team performs, according to a landmark internal study Google ran on over 180 of its own teams. Teams where people feel safe admitting confusion outperform teams where everyone pretends to have it together. Curiosity spreads. When a leader says, "I'm not sure, but let's find out together," it gives everyone else permission to stop performing and start learning.
Most meetings are theater. Everyone takes turns reporting how well things are going because nobody wants to be the one who admits they're stuck. Super teams break that theater with one blunt question. What are you stuck on? Toyota built its entire manufacturing legacy around a strikingly similar idea. On their factory floor, any single worker, regardless of rank, could pull a cord called the andon cord the instant they spotted a problem, and it would stop the entire production line. Not to punish anyone, to fix the issue while it was still small, instead of letting it snowball into a disaster nobody could trace. That's the real power of surfacing obstacles early. A small admitted problem is fixable. A hidden one becomes a crisis.
There's an old myth that great leaders should float above the details, delegate everything, stay in the strategy room, never get their hands dirty. Research says the opposite is true. Consider the story of Ernest Shackleton. the explorer who led his crew across the brutal ice of Antarctica after their ship was crushed and sunk. Shackleton didn't retreat to a tent and issue orders. He hauled supplies, rowed lifeboats, and stood watch alongside his men in freezing conditions for months. Every single member of his crew survived, an outcome historians still call one of the greatest leadership feats ever recorded. His presence in the trenches wasn't symbolic. It was the reason morale never broke. The distinction that matters here: involvement builds capacity, but micromanagement destroys it. The best leaders work beside their people, not over them.
Section 5. Make feedback feel like support. Feedback either unlocks growth or shuts it down completely. There's rarely a middle ground. Pixar built one of the most celebrated creativity engines in film history around a room they call the Brain Trust. Every director brings an unfinished film, flaws and all, into that room, and everyone tears into the story's weak points. But there's one sacred rule: the criticism is aimed at the work, never the person. That single distinction is why filmmakers walk out of brutal 2-hour critique sessions energized instead of crushed, because they know the room is trying to make the film better, not tear them down. That's the entire secret of feedback that works. Frame the mistake as useful data on the path forward, not as a verdict on someone's worth.
Section 6. Encourage growth even when it doesn't benefit you. This one is almost countercultural. The best leaders invest in their people's growth even when there's no immediate payoff for the team. Think of Dumbledore's relationship with young wizards at Hogwarts in the Harry Potter stories. He wasn't training students to serve his own interests. He nurtured curiosity and skill in people, trusting that growth, wherever it led, made the entire community stronger. Real mentorship rarely asks, "What's in it for me?" It asks, "What could this person become?" Super team leaders behave exactly the same way. Employees on the strongest teams are far more likely to feel genuinely supported when they explore something new, even a side pursuit that has nothing to do with their day job, because their leaders understand something simple. People who are growing somewhere bring more energy everywhere, including back to the team.
The final ingredient is the one that makes everything else stick: purpose. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived years in concentration camps during World War II, spent the rest of his life studying one question: why do some people endure unimaginable hardship while others collapse under far less? His conclusion, laid out in his landmark book, was that people don't need an easy life to stay resilient. They need a reason, a sense that their struggle connects to something larger than themselves. There's a famous story, often told and worth repeating, about a janitor at NASA during the 1960s space race. When asked what his job was, he reportedly said, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." He wasn't polishing floors. He understood exactly how his work connected to the mission. That's the final multiplier. Teams that understand why their work matters don't settle for good enough. They keep pushing, because the goal was never the paycheck. It was the purpose.
Let's go back to where we started. That basketball team, buried at the bottom of the league in 2022. What actually happened over those 3 years wasn't magic. It was these 7 habits, compounding month after month. Relentless experimentation, contagious curiosity, obstacles named early instead of hidden. Leaders who worked in the trenches, feedback that healed instead of hurt, growth encouraged with no strings attached, and a purpose bigger than the scoreboard. None of that required a genius. None of it required unlimited resources. It required a decision, made daily, to keep getting better instead of settling for good. So here's the real question this story leaves you with. Which one of these 7 habits is your team missing right now? Because the moment you find it, that's the moment your own turnaround begins. If this gave you a new way to think about growth, share it with someone building a team of their own. And I'll see you in the next one.